Hello. Back for another tale, perhaps. As always, you'll always find tales here. And I think I have a fairly interesting one for you. A bit unusual, out of place in circumstance. Beyond the realm of Earth, deep within the realm of the demons. In a smaller kingdom, the kingdom of Bokari. One without very much prestige within the demon world. Its people did their best to live meager lives, as they were far out of the way. Very few tended to bother with them. Their village, Crag Peak, lied on the outskirts of the oceans of the demon world, the edge of a peak of cliffs that dropped spiraling down into the sea. Our story here begins with a very common individual. His name is Thaddeus, a simple herdsman. Or, I suppose, not a simple herdsman yet. He has yet to come of age and take over his mother and father's business herding cattle. But currently, they seem to be going through a bit of strife as they look around their home frantically. Where is she, Thaddeus? I don't know, Mom. It was your job to look after her. I know, Dad, Thaddeus exclaimed to his parents, as they seemed rather irate with him. I've looked everywhere. She's not in the house. Well, then look outside the house, son. If anything happens to your sister Isabel, I'm going to hold you responsible. Of course you are, Thaddeus said, rubbing his hand across his face. I'll go find her, he said, as he rushed out of the house, calling out as he did. Isabel! Isabel, where are you? He went looking for quite some time, searching all of her most common places to play, and finding nothing. Thaddeus was beginning to grow quite concerned as he drifted further and further out from the primary lands that him and his father and mother lived upon, calling out to his sister again and again, before finally, far into the distance, hearing a reply. Thaddeus! He heard, only just, barely sounding like a whisper on the edge of his senses. But what concerned him most was not the distance, but the direction. His home was one of the closest, bordering the peaks that dropped into the sea, and his sister's call seemed to be coming from that direction. As he began rushing there, still calling out her name. Isabel! He said as he made his way through the short run of forest that led to the craggy peak. All the while, he heard his sister's voice calling out, growing louder as he approached. Thaddeus, help me! She exclaimed, as Thaddeus eventually found himself at the very peak, which dropped off into the sea, looking around frantically and finding no Isabel. Thaddeus! He heard her voice call out, and though he was frantic for a moment, he became even more so when he realized that her voice was emanating from over the edge. As he rushed to the edge of the cliff, finding his sister dangling, hanging on a small cluster of roots and branches that seemed to extend out over the edge of the cliff, having torn their way through the rock and stone to emerge out on the other side. There, with tears in her eyes and hanging for dear life, was his little sister, Isabel, nearly 8 years old. Isabel! What in the world happened? He exclaimed, looking down at her. Well, I saw a puppy. A puppy, Thaddeus replied, looking down at her furiously. Yeah, he was all cute and fluffy. I tried to get him to come to me, but he got scared and ran off into the woods. So I followed him. But it turns out that the puppy was a wolf, and his mommy and daddy weren't very happy with me. And luckily, or unluckily, I sort of fell over the edge and caught myself on these branches, which kept me from falling all the way down there, she said as her eyes glanced over the edge to the several 100-foot drop beneath. You are going to get it when we get back home, Thaddeus said as he leaned out over the edge, reaching down to his sister, who did her best to stay a grasp of the roots that protruded from the side of the cliff, while reaching out to her brother. And soon enough, he clasped her hand and wrist tightly, beginning to pull her up from the edge of the cliff, finally bringing her all the way back on board, past the edge, where he breathed a deep sigh of relief. Thank God that's over. You know, Mom and Dad would have killed me if you died. It's not my fault. There was the puppy. Remember? Isabel, you don't go chasing random puppies into the woods. It's dangerous. You don't have to be so mean about it, Isabel replied, with a bit of a pout on her face. But that puppy was so cute. Yes, puppies are cute. Even wolf puppies are cute. That doesn't mean you follow them into the woods. So, Isabel, the next time you see a fluffy wandering puppy of some kind, what are you not going to do? Isabel rolled her eyes begrudgingly. Follow it into the woods. Exactly. Don't follow strange puppies into the woods. Now let's get home before our parents kill me, he said, as Isabel got up quickly, dusting herself off as much as he could and beginning to walk in the direction of home, as Thaddeus heard a curious sound, sort of a cracking, as he was standing up, pausing for a moment to reflect on what the sound might be. He suddenly found himself losing his balance as a large crack tore its way across the segment of stone in front of him, and Thaddeus found himself falling as the stone beneath him crumbled away, the view of the area above the cliffs beginning to dissipate, fall away, as the last thing he saw was his sister turning around, looking shocked as her brother began to fall, the land beneath him crumbling, her voice calling out to him. "Thaddeus!" she exclaimed, and then for a moment, the awe-striking realization set in. This was Thaddeus's end, and he was going to die. The fall was brief, but felt like it took forever. Before, not surprisingly at all, given his situation, Thaddeus eventually reached the bottom, the world going dark around him. But, surprisingly to Thaddeus, while darkness held for a time, eventually he found himself opening his eyes. There he laid upon a craggy beachside, filled with jagged stone and assortment of rocks, lifting his head up from the sand and stones, water rushing upon his body, as he hoisted himself up. "Oh, what in the hell?" he said as he rubbed his face, pulling himself to his feet. "Oh, I'm alive. Oh, thank everything," he said as he began to brush his clothes off. As he did, he began to notice something curious. That being that Thaddeus didn't feel cold. He had just pulled himself out of the water. He was soaking wet. Judging by the time, it was early in the morning, and yet he had fallen off of the cliff sometime in the afternoon. How exactly did he even get here? And why didn't he feel cold? He was soaking wet this early in the morning. The air must be frightfully chilly. There's even a fair amount of fog. And that was anything but a slight fall. His body should be racked with pain. And yet, Thaddeus didn't feel any. He seemed to feel fairly normal. There were no aches and pains. A bit of a popping sound when he tried to move his shoulder, but it didn't hurt. As the curiosities began to mount, clearly it was a chilly morning. Thick fog in the air. The time of season was right for things to be direly cold. And yet, Thaddeus could not see his breath. And then he noticed that he wasn't breathing. In fact, no matter how hard he tried, he could not for the life of him expel air. Instead, as he tried to expel air, gouts of water bubbled out of his mouth as his mind began to frantically panic. What? What is that? Why is water coming out? He said as he looked down at the small puddle he had spewed in complete and utter fright, as in his panic he began to notice another curiosity. Though he was frantic, terrified in fact, he could not feel his heart beating. And as he began to check for it, surely enough, he found himself lacking. No, you gotta be kidding me. I can't be. Oh, this sucks. This so sucks. I can't believe it. I'm undead. What a ripoff. I was just starting to grow into being handsome. I mean, seriously, I'm only 19. I can't be undead yet, Thaddeus said to himself, realizing that, like some others who had died around his village, and around the landscape that he lived in general, as the land that they lived in bordered the kingdom of undeath, he too had joined the hordes of undead and become a true undead. Well, congratulations, you idiot, Thaddeus said, looking down at his hands. You're a zombie now.